Hey, this is Todd. It's been a while since I've done a hex focused video, so here it is. I'm not sure what I will title this yet. My first impulse was fun with hexes, but we'll see how that goes after I record this bad boy. In any case, I wanted to give a couple of tips and tricks for working with hexes. The first thing I wanted to say, I usually use 5 or 6 mile hexes. And I think to our modern minds, that feels incredibly small. And you want to take your giant 8.5 by 11 or what is 11 by 17 big piece of paper, real or virtual, and you just fill it with hexes. Go into hexographer and just randomly generate an entire universe of hexes. And these 6 mile hexes feel incredibly small. And it feels like you have just millions of them to fill. This dark feeling can seep in where you're thinking, how am I going to fill all these hexes? What am I going to put in there? A lot of advice says every hex should have something interesting in it. So, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that for millions and millions of hexes? So I've said this before in my other videos. I think it is great to have something interesting in every hex. I don't disagree with that advice necessarily. But at the same time, if you don't have anything, don't do anything. Don't feel like you got to fill it just to fill it. I think that's where you end up with stuff that's really rote, that isn't actually interesting to the players, certainly isn't interesting to you, and it turns the whole process into a grind, which you're going to want to avoid. I think the same thing happens with dungeons. Old school dungeons had empty rooms. They're rooms, they're not used, they're empty. And as we grew up and the hobby modernized, people thought, well, there shouldn't be just empty rooms. Every room should have something interesting in it. But then what do you do with all those rooms? And I think sometimes having an empty room, having an empty hex, even if the only purpose of it is just to save your sanity, do it. More important that you are able to get everything out that you want to do and feel good doing it and want to do it, then you feel like, okay, I had 1,000 hexes and I've done them all, and now my brain is fried. Half those hexes are all variations on the same thing because I just ran out of creativity and I don't want to do this anymore. Now let's flip it around. I said before, you end up, and I have this same impulse just to fill a whole giant page with 1,000,000 hexes. Feel free to start small. A 6 mile hex has more or less, call it a little bit over 31 square miles in it, which is actually a lot. Go to your local map, zoom out to a reasonable distance, and create, copy it, paste a screenshot of it into Photoshop or whatever, and create a 31-mile block. Square and drop it on your map. You can see that it actually covers a lot of ground, particularly if you're looking at, if you want to go to Europe or other places where there's a lot of those old settlements that have been around a long time as opposed to modern cities. You can cover a lot. You'll see like, wow, there's a lot of things going on in here. So whereas I think in our modern mind, we think 6 miles in our car, that's just a couple minutes, no big deal. Or 12 miles if we're going end to end. There's actually a lot going on there. And it's also easy to lose sight of when we're abstracting everything. Okay, 6 miles the middle, 12 miles here. Oh, that's easy. Oh, you can walk 12 miles and blah, blah, blah. Well, real rates of travel were a lot slower. And in our fantasy games, unless you have, airships and steampunk trains or teleportation circles. If you look historically, people didn't travel all that fast. It took time to get places. And that's why you will see when you look at a map of a place that has a lot of old settlements, they actually are grouped pretty close together. Maybe a half a mile at most, or half a day's travel, which is not that far in between settlements because people needed to get back and forth and they need to basically get there, do their business and come home. So you would, instead of stretching out for miles and miles like we might think about now, you tended to be around a significant geographical area. You'll just see a bunch of little settlements all next to each other. So that one hex doesn't have to just be one town or one dungeon or one thing. There can be a lot. If you were to take and superimpose, again, that 31 square miles, you might see there might be 2, 3, 4 towns in there. There might be rivers and forests and a hill or two or a mountain, swamp, all crammed in there. And as I've mentioned in other videos, right, when we abstract it, when you're looking at it from that satellite view, sure, you might think overwhelmingly, oh, those are hills. And so you put the hill icon on there, or looks more like forest. So you're going to put the forest icon in there. But in game, zoom in there, really look in there, and feel free to say, hey, this hex, yeah, it's only 6 miles as a crow flies, or as a kenku flies, or as whatever flies, as a flying goblin flies. But for everybody else, we're not using perfectly graded modern roads. We're talking even on the best king's roads, they're following the contours, they're winding around, maybe they're following the rivers or they're following the valleys. So you don't get a straight line to the middle of the hex. You don't get a straight line through the hex. You're winding and crawling, and in some places the road might not be in great shape. There might be fords to cross. Some of it might be just really winding or downhill and uphill. And how do you navigate those? You can slow it down. You don't have to zip through these hexes. Slow it down. If you have an important hex, maybe your starting hex or a few other ones, blow them up. Make some big zoomed in versions that really allow you to express those 31 square miles and everything that's inside of it, as opposed to trying to make 1,000 hexes that are not that meaningful. I think with a starting party, certainly if you're playing an OSR game, and even I think a modern, say, 5th edition game, if you're starting level 1 and they're not just bathed in resources that give them fast travel, you could spend a lot of time in that 31 square miles. I haven't checked something like what's the starter adventure that suddenly escaped out of my mind, Phandelver module. I imagine a lot of it probably fits into one hex. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe they stretched out the distance. I don't know. But you can fill a whole campaign, certainly whole adventures, in one hex. And that's not saying that we're going to have no travel, because all it takes is you have the town that's in the valley and it's following the river and that's where the road goes. But the place you need to get to is on the other side of a hill, across a swamp that needs to be discovered. You still get all your wilderness travel in there, all your kind of exploration, but you're still just in one hex. Just because it's only a few miles away, if that terrain isn't easy, it's difficult. I am recording this in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. And if I want to go walk into town, yeah, it's only I don't even know if it's a mile, but it's straight into town. Bam, that's easy. All paved roads downhill. The house I'm looking at is kind of on the bottom of a hillside, and there's something that's just as close, if not closer, on the other side of that hill. It might take me a good hours to get over that hill. Because, right, I got to pick my path. It's vertical. Now it's difficult. Now I got to try to find game trails or other ways of getting over there. Even though if I were just to look at it, zoom out, if I zoom out far enough, it's just going to look like we're touching each other. It should just be that close. I should be able to just reach out and get there. Well, it doesn't work that way. So engage with those elements. You don't have to feel like I got to stretch stuff out and go across 50 hexes just because I want wilderness travel, especially before they start unlocking faster modes of transport. And even if they have horses, a lot of this stuff, if I got to go over this hill, a pack horse, something is going to be very useful to me because it allows me to walk unencumbered. But if I have some kind of racing horse, it's not going to help me at all. That horse isn't going to significantly increase my travel up this hill, but up and over this hill. What it's going to do is maybe allow me to move a bit more, and I'm not exhausted whenever I try to brake because the horse is carrying my stuff, right? You can engage with those things and don't worry so much about this zoomed out distance. And again, try to get out of maybe your modern mindset of what travel is like. Because if you think about it, when you get in your car just to go 5 miles down the road, it feels like no big deal. In these kind of medieval times, that was not insignificant, and even longer distances were even more significant. And that's why you had people that never spent their whole lives and never left 10 or 12 miles around where they lived, because moving those distances were significant undertakings. They were dangerous, and they didn't have a payoff because everything was sort of localized near there. You had your local market town who did your stuff. Your farm was here. Your local lord and their protectors were right here. You tried to just go off and wander around. It was dangerous. Utilize that. And then when you do want to spread out and your party's ready to spread out, it really can give you that epic feel because they've been in this local level, and now you're zooming out to maybe a more regional level. And that zooming out, that change of scope can be given more significance. Maybe the next thing, I guess, as far as a tip or trick, is to use regions and sort of broader locations to your advantage. And this is something we do all the time when we're doing our maps. Whenever you look at someone's fantasy map, or we go back to, say, Tolkien, the sort of like, I guess I feel like the grandfather, right, of the fantasy map. You have these wonderful areas. Here is Mirkwood. Here is the Vale of Anduin. Here are all these places. Well, you can use them as more than just a place name, because the hexes inside of Mirkwood will all share certain characteristics, which allows you to then say, okay, all of Mirkwood has these similarities. That doesn't mean that each hex inside Mirkwood can't have something unique about it, but it lets you take that region and say, I only really need to define this overall region, say 2 out of 3 things. And I maybe I did this backwards because I'll get into what I feel like is a useful shorthand for describing hexes. But when we're describing these hexes, you go, okay, I've got 8 hexes that I've marked out as Mirkwood. These 8 hexes are all going to share certain things in common because they're all part of Mirkwood. That can include, random encounter tables. That can include a certain mood or feel or anything else kind of unique. I can have all that for that region. And now for all those individual hexes, those 8 individual hexes, now maybe I like to think of one thing that sets the eastern edge of Mirkwood apart from this other part of Mirkwood. And you can drill down more depending on how much you want to describe those. For something like Mirkwood, we could say, okay, what do we have? We have this sense of dread and despair, that kind of darkness in Mirkwood. We have that labyrinthian quality where you feel like you're getting lost. We have certain creatures that are running around. And I'm not going to even mention, I'm going to save the spiders for a later point, but just in terms of, because of the dark presence that's there, there's just, we have what normal creatures might be in the woods, but those are maybe less in numbers in Mirkwood. Instead, we have other creatures, regardless of where you are in Mirkwood. But now we can look at it and say, okay, and maybe we split up Mirkwood into 3 parts. So we have Mirkwood entire, and that's how we've described it. And again, I'm not going to have the numbers right, or not the number. I'm not going to have the locations right. I don't remember which parts of Mirkwood, which things were in. So I'm just going to divide into 3 pieces. And then we have where the necromancer is. And let's say that in our game, in this our version of Tolkien, maybe it's Sauron, maybe it's not, but it literally is a necromancer. Literally has undead wandering around and through there. So on that part of Mirkwood, I have the things I've established for the whole of Mirkwood, and now I've drilled down and say, okay, in this part of Mirkwood, here are these things I'm adding to the mix. We go to the second part, that's where those spiders are. So now that is going to create a variance there in terms of the geography, because now you might have lots of webbing and lots of that, and maybe the trees are even more oppressive, or maybe they're less oppressive just because of the webbing that's going across, so that's going to make it even darker. There's going to be a lot less wildlife of any kind because the spiders are eating them, all that kind of stuff. And then you have the third part, which is where the elves of Mirkwood are still holding sway. So maybe it's gentler, there's less of the nasty kind of creatures in there, but now you have to deal with elf patrols, and they're not particularly friendly to outsiders, as the hobbits found out, or as the hobbit and the dwarves found out. So they have their own challenges of that part. So we've taken this 8 hex area, and I'm just using 8 as I just pulled that number out, right? It could be any number you have, and we've made our work easier by saying, okay, we have this overall region, which is Mirkwood. Now we split it up in these 3, call them sub-regions. 1 the necromancer, 1 the spiders, or 2 the spiders, 3 the elves. So now we've set those up. And then for now these individual hexes, we could talk about what might be an interesting thing there. And everything we've done before can help us imagine what that might be. So we know what Mirkwood's like overall. Then we think about, well, where are the spiders? So maybe we think about in 1 hex of the spider hex, maybe that's where they're keeping their lairs. So we have massive webs, and I can imagine maybe these are sort of intelligent spiders. So maybe they've made structures out of webbing things. Almost, I could think of it like this inversion of Galadriel, the wood over there. Well, I can think in terms of that. So that's kind of like their town, whatever their settlement, and what that might be, and how awesome and awful and creepy and arachnid it could be. Maybe a second hex over there is their food storage. This is where they bring stuff to let it wriggle and get ripe for them to feed. So that's where you have all those hanging, mummified creatures in various states of living and dying. That's where they are. And then we can go down the line. Maybe the third one is something else. Maybe it just has a natural feature. Maybe this is where we have that a small rise where you can maybe, as Bilbo tried to do, go up into a tall tree, and because of this little rise is able to look out and get their heads above the forest, something like that. So it doesn't have to all be about the spiders, but we can use that to inform them. Of course, the necromancer, we're going to have where does the necromancer actually live? That could be one. Maybe there's an old graveyard that's long been overgrown by the forest, and that has some interesting stuff in another area. Think about that for everything. And with the elves, maybe there's places where they sort of pen or protect the animals. So we have lots of animals that are there, that their livestock that they're keeping, or at least ones that they keep above ground, are there. Of course, we have the elven citadel itself. That's another hex, and so on and so forth. So it lessens that burden of thinking you have to create super individual pieces from whole cloth for every hex. We still will end up with a whole bunch. Camera died. Luckily, I was recording on a second camera. We still have a whole bunch of things that we're creating. We still have a whole bunch of hexes that we have ultimately created unique characteristics for. But we've done it in such a way, I think, that spreads out the work, allows us to reuse the work that we've created so that it's lessen the burden. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, and I probably should have mentioned this, I probably did this out of order, my bad. Find some shorthand that works for you. And what shorthand you can use, what shorthand will work, is very much going to depend on your style of GMing. I'm a very improv-heavy GM, and I'm comfortable doing that. I can roll with a very limited shorthand because I can just let my brain flow from there, and then I can write down basically the stuff that I come up with so that I can make sure that everything is consistent. So the kind of stuff that I want for a hex, I don't need a ton. I'll have random encounter tables for different regions, much like we talked about Mirkwood and these different areas of Mirkwood. I'll have that kind of stuff done out, and then I'll just tweak those for different things. So I'll have my general, here's my woods encounter table. Then when I need a specialized woods encounter table, say Mirkwood, I'll say, okay, I'll take out the entries, these 3 entries, because I don't think we're going to see them there, and I'll replace them with these 3 entries. So great, I'll have a whole new encounter table, or at least not a whole new one, but a modified encounter table, a variant of my original encounter table, but I haven't had to put a ton of work into it. Other than that, the 3 things that I really think are 3, I think it's 3 things, is obviously what is the type of terrain? And of course, I'm keeping in mind that it is only the most abundant or the most obvious type, not every type. So here I'm in the Berkshires. Berkshires are hills. It's a chain of hills. So that would probably be the overall hex type. But the other part of it is there's forest. Most of the hills are forested. So you could probably call it a forest hex if you wanted to. But for me, I know it's forested. And in my brain, I know it. If I was creating a hill hex that I had in my mind as forested, I'll know that. I might write it in there, hills/forest. Just to, if I walk away for a week or a few days and come back, I'll remember. But even in this text, I know that there's swampland. There's some open plains. There's some settlements here. So I might put the major feature, hills, depending on the hex, maybe a couple of minor features that I know are in there. The next thing is what is the feel for it? So I guess there's gonna be 4 things now I'm thinking about it. What's the feel for this hex? Is it peaceful? Do you feel relaxed? Do you feel at ease here? Is it something else? Do you feel dread like you might in Mirkwood? A sense of unease, a sense of an oppressive energy? Is there an elemental connection to it? Is there something to do here with the element of water, fire, earth? Something that might affect how things look, how things feel. Then I might think, well, if there's an elemental connection, maybe there's some kind of hidden portal to one of those elements. I like to use a lot of elemental plane crossovers. I just think they're fun and they're interesting, obviously super dangerous, but useful. If you find one of these things and you can remember it, then when you get strong enough to want to go there, have to go to one of these other planes, you can find a way to get there. So if it's a swamp, I know there's a connection to the elemental plane of water. It's not going to be a regular swamp. It's really going to be an uber swamp. What might hills be like if there's a connection to the elemental plane of earth? Or what might a place be like, a forest be like, if it has some connection to the plane of fire? And you can expand that to outer planes if you want. What would a demonic woods be like? Or an abyssal swamp? Or a mountain that has a connection to one of the good aligned planes? Or a whole other plane, right? A pandemonium grassland. What might that look like? There's chaotic grassland, or something to do with the ethereal plane, or anything like that, right? You can use your imagination, but for me, just having that written down on a piece of paper, just thinking in my mind, all of a sudden I have these interesting ideas are coming up, and that stuff I can run with on the game. I can just riff on that, and then all I have to do is remember my notes. Sometimes it can be more of a challenge than you might imagine. Or maybe you can't imagine, but I got some stuff there. I like to have landmarks. I think landmarks are useful and they're interesting. They don't have to be something super complicated. They don't have to be dungeons all the time. Some of them can be. They don't have to be unnatural, though they can be, but they do a few things. I like to reward XP for exploring hexes, and I think an interesting thing, a neat thing you can do, and when I was starting to come up with this video and I was starting to think about what I wanted to talk about, the Assassin's video games came to mind. I haven't played them in forever, so I'm thinking specifically of the first couple, but you'd be exploring the town and there would be a really tall tower, and you would do is you get to the top of this tower, you would look out, and that would sort of lock you in this part of the city map, and it would sort of open up all these different things. There's your way of basically saying, okay, now I've seen this new neighborhood, this new area. You could think of your landmark like that. When they find the landmark, they can kind of mark down this hex in their maps. And it's not just a mechanical thing. So I could say, okay, once you've found this landmark, I'm going to give you the XP for exploring it, because that's kind of the main, other than the major geographical features, this is this kind of unique or unique-ish feature. So you're going to get your experience. There are fictional benefits too. If you think about old school treasure maps, or not even old school treasure maps, they'll say things like, okay, you got to go to the rock that's a man with the pointed face. I don't know. That sounds kind of lame. Or something else. Got to find Eagle Rock. And then from Eagle Rock, you're going to find this other one. You're going to look for that landmark. Well, now your players might have their map and they'll know, okay, we got to find Eagle Rock. And once they found Eagle Rock, or if they found it in the past, suddenly this part of this treasure map or whatever kind of map now makes more sense. Oh, we got Eagle Rock. The same thing for when they're navigating. Maybe they found Eagle Rock, and then they're on the next steps and they get lost. Now they may not know exactly where they are in the grand scheme of things or how to get to where they need to go, but you could say to them as a benefit of finding that landmark, well, you don't know much, but you know how to get back to Eagle Rock. That much you do know. Or you know about where you are from Eagle Rock, even though you don't know exactly where you are. It's another benefit. So you can utilize these landmarks in both a mechanical sense, if you want to do something with XP, like I like to do, to kind of give you a reason to explore. Say, hey, you find these kind of landmarks, you will get experience for them. It lets you do some kind of cartography on their maps, or even on your maps. You can use that to mark your hexes. This is not just a hill. This is a hill that's got Eagle Rock on it. Suddenly, oh, that's a kind of a unique thing. Then the last thing I like to think about is there a secret? Something that maybe is not generally known about it. Sometimes this will tie into the landmark, sometimes it might be separate, but for me, I usually try to think of these things holistically together. So I'll think about, okay, well, this is a hill that is abyssal. It's got this strange rock. Maybe there's some kind of portal to a plane of hell that's beneath that rock, that was covered up by heroes long ago, that's sealed there, but there's still just energy kind of seeps out of it. And maybe there's something that's gone wrong. Maybe there's a crack in the rock now so that even more energy is coming out. Something like that is not generally known. It's something that could be interesting. It might lead to adventures. It might just be like, oh, okay. And it doesn't have to have that much import. You could have some kind of fun with it. Oh, it smells of lilacs in this area for some weird reason. Or, oh, this is where will-o-wisps like to come on Midsummer's Eve. But it just gives you some interest. It's something that you can have an NPC throw out there, a special something. It could be just an interesting thing that your players, if they're intrigued with a place, they want to roll some dice, or just role play, doing some extra discovery, it gives you something to tell them to make it even more memorable. But I can have this list of these 3 or 4 things. Okay, we're in the hills. The overall mood is depressing. The landmark is a large stone menhir, or just a large megalithic stone. And then I'm going to say that there is a burial chamber, the entrance to which is beneath this megalithic stone. And now, I don't know, I haven't decided anything else about that. Probably with the megalithic stone of that kind of thing, I don't know if the players would even think about trying to dig it up. Maybe they would, maybe they won't, I don't know. But it just gives me some flavor. And then when I'm playing, I'll say, okay, they're in this hex. I can think about, well, how do these different factors enhance the descriptions of this hex? How does this being here, how does this burial ground, does it have to do with the depressing atmosphere that's around here? How do they connect? How does it do that? And then I can just use it in my brain. And then, okay, well, then as they're playing, I'll start to let some of these characteristics flow out into the narrative, into the fiction I'm presenting. I think at least my players will usually grab onto stuff and then ask more questions and show more interest in just discussing it themselves, which then feeds back into me. And so you get this nice loop going where you're taking information about hexes. That's all I've got. Hopefully this stuff helps you out, or you'll find some value in it. I feel like I've gone on way too long, but hopefully you'll find some things interesting in there. As usual, please, if you enjoy these videos, give me the old thumbs up. It helps my videos pop up on YouTube and the algorithms, and it shows to YouTube that these videos are useful to somebody. Hopefully they'll be useful to you. If you'd like to be to subscribe to the channel, that would be great. I'm trying to work my way towards 1,000 subscribers. I think as of this recording, I've got maybe 150 left to go. So every subscriber helps, and I appreciate anybody who has subscribed. I also have a Patreon. I had a couple new Patreon folks this month, so thank you very much for your support there. Whenever you happen to be listening, watching, absorbing this, have a great rest of your day, afternoon, evening, or night. I will talk to you later. Game on.